welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church Online. This week in worship, Pastor David concludes our series on Ruth with a look at lives of integrity. Let's listen.
Well, I'd like to start by showing you a video, and it's a short video of someone who is performing the high jump in track and field. I never did this particular track and field event, but if you did, this will look familiar to you. So let's go ahead and watch that video. Now, the sleuths among you will recognize that as Janine Dishman's daughter, Savannah. So thank you for that video, Janine. But what I want you to notice is that this athlete, she runs towards the bar, and before she gets there, she kind of turns backwards and then hurls herself over so that her back is the closest part to the bar. And if you have been to track and field events before, that didn't look surprising to you. I'm sure you've never seen anyone do it any other way. I sure haven't. When I go and look for a high jump, that's the type of high jump that I am expecting. But did you know that nobody performed it like that prior to 1968? No, prior to 1968, if you were going to perform the high jump, you would either run at it and jump over feet first, or sometimes you'd hurl yourself over to the side. You would never jump with your back going first. But a man named Dick Fosbury, he realized that he could not compete using these standard methods. So he began doing something different. He began jumping with his back to the bar first. It became known as the Fosbury flop. So we have a picture of him doing the Fosbury flop. And when he started jumping this way, people thought it looked ridiculous. Coaches were skeptical. Competitors would kind of laugh at him up until he won the gold medal of the Olympics in 1968. And today, nearly every high jumper will use the Fosbury flop. They will use this technique that he pioneered in 1968. Now, in the moments that he was working on this and developing this, I doubt he understood the significance of what he was doing. I mean, when he was practicing on high school track fields, he was probably not thinking to himself, one day I'm going to revolutionize my sport. But he did. Sometimes a small act begins a chain of events that leads to us changing history, but you don't know it in the moment. I mean, honestly, we rarely know how today's decisions are going to shape tomorrow's story, which is what makes today's decisions so important. I think that's what the story of Ruth is going to teach us today. We are in the final week as we are studying her story, and the decision that she made early in her life to stay with Naomi and to provide support for her mother-in-law, those decisions we will see now at the end of her story how they have dramatically impacted her life. Now, if you were with us last week, we left off on a cliffhanger. Yes, here was the cliffhanger. So this man named Boaz, he wants to marry Ruth, and Ruth wants to marry Boaz. But in this ancient law of guardian redeemership, he was not the closest relative. And so he knew that even though he wanted to marry her, that there was someone else that had the first right of redemption, both to marrying Ruth and to all the property that Naomi was going to sell. So where we left off is Boaz was going to go do the right thing and talk with this man about whether he wanted to be that first guardian redeemer. So this is how chapter 4, the last chapter of Ruth, begins. Chapter 4, verse 1. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. And Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Okay, so our story begins with a setting, and the setting is at the town gate. Now, the town gate in this point in history is so much more than just the entrance to the city. It operated as the courthouse It operated as a place that you would do your kind of legal business transactions. It was the main gathering place of the community was at the town gate. So Boaz goes there and he sees the man that he wants to do business with, and he calls him over and says, "Come on, let's have a conversation." And in the next verse, he also calls 10 elders of the town together because this is going to be official business. He wants witnesses to the conversation that he is about to have. And then he makes his pitch in verse 3. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." Okay, we should note at this point in the story that Boaz is a very respectable man. I mean, he wants to marry Ruth, and he probably could have found some way to bend the rules in his favor to accomplish what he wants. I mean, he's next in line to be the guardian redeemer. He is so close to getting what he wants. As I read that this week, it made me wonder, how often are we tempted to shift things in our direction in ways that are not flat out wrong, but definitely ethically in that kind of gray area? Perhaps it's that employee at work who discovers that a mistake has been made that benefits them financially, and they don't say anything. I mean, after all, it's not their mistake. They're not the ones who did anything wrong. They're just kind of staying quiet so that they benefit from that mistake. Or maybe it's the student who found a more creative way to finish the assignment. And maybe it doesn't break the rules, but it's not in the spirit of the assignment. There's definitely no learning going on with how they have decided to do the assignment. Or perhaps you're selling a house and you know of something that might be wrong with the house, but nobody's asked about it. And so you think, well, I'm not really going to respond. I'm not going to bring it up unless they say something. We are often faced with the same temptation as Boaz. To ensure the outcome we desire, we're tempted to take that little shortcut or compromise our morals just a little bit. But here's the truth. Character is revealed in the moments when we have the opportunity to bend the rules and instead we respond with integrity. That's what makes Boaz quite remarkable. He chooses integrity instead of expediency and faithfulness over convenience. And perhaps most extraordinary is he simply trusts God. He's essentially saying to God, I trust that if this relationship with Ruth is your will, then it's going to happen. And I don't need to bend the rules to ensure that it happens. I'm trusting God. So, will Boaz be rewarded? Will this trust of God pan out? Well, here is what the closest relative says. I will redeem it, he says. Oh boy. The man who's the closest relative agrees to buy the land, to redeem all of Naomi's assets. I mean, he probably thinks that it's just a good financial decision. After all, who doesn't want more real estate? If my relative passed away and I had the first opportunity to buy it at a reasonable price, I would probably say, sure, yeah, absolutely. But this means that Boaz has lost his opportunity to marry Ruth. Or maybe there's a little bit more of the story still to tell. Let's continue reading. In verse 5, then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. And at this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. So the man backs out once he realizes that marrying Ruth is a part of this deal. And notice his word choice. I might endanger my own estate. The Redeemer is simply calculating the economics of this deal. And what he's saying is when it was just land, yeah, that deal would make sense to me. But if I have to take care of Ruth, and if I have to support Naomi in addition to all this land, well, then I need to redo those numbers because those numbers may not work out as well. That deal has just gotten a lot more expensive. He may be thinking to himself, okay, if I have to support these people, what if the land does not now justify my investment in it? The Redeemer probably sees these added expenses of Ruth and Naomi, and he simply says to himself, the numbers don't work, and he walks away from the deal. Now, in many ways, he's simply being a prudent businessman, and we can't blame him for that. But what I want you to notice is the contrast between him and Boaz. Boaz doesn't really care what this costs him because he's more interested in helping this family in need, in Ruth and Naomi. So you have this unnamed relative asking, what will this cost me? And then you have Boaz asking, how can I help in this situation? The first man simply wants to protect his future, but Boaz wants to protect the futures of Ruth and Naomi. And notice then the outcome of these actions. We have this first man who continues to remain anonymous. History does not remember his name. It is never listed in the book of Ruth. But contrast that with Boaz, a name that we still remember 4,000 years ago because of the generosity that he has now shown Ruth and Naomi. So the world that we live in will often encourage you to ask a set of questions such as, well, how does this benefit me? What is in it for me? But the story that Boaz is telling here encourages to ask us or to have us ask a different set of questions. It's who has God placed in front of me? And that person that God has placed in front of me today, how can I assist them? How can I help them? How can I use what I have to change their situation? This makes me think of the countless parents and grandparents in this congregation who have decided to invest in their kids or grandkids. And they have said, sure, I will drive you to every sporting event and appointment. I will show up and root you on, even if you just play 1 minute at the very end of the game. I will work with you on your homework. I will invest in your future. Not because it makes sense financially. Quite the opposite. It will cost a lot of your time, a lot of your resources. It will cost a lot of your energy and part of who you are. And yet it is holy work, isn't it, when you invest in the futures of others? Or not just parents and grandparents. I think of the teachers in this room or the teachers that we had that were so formative to us as we were growing up. I mean, how many teachers chose to spend extra hours outside of their work time to benefit their students? If they wanted to, a teacher could just deliver the lessons and then go home, right? That's all that was required by their job description. But every great teacher can point to the students they stayed late for, the students that they tutored, that they encouraged, who required maybe a little extra energy, students who could never repay them for the time that they've given. They didn't ask, what's in it for me? They asked, what student needs my help? And this is really the model that Boaz is giving us. Boaz says, how can I help this family that is in tremendous need? And then implicitly asks us to do the same in our lives. So at this point in the story, Boaz has reached that moment that he has been working towards. He is able to finally marry Ruth, which is what happens in verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Okay, at this point, I want us to just pause And notice how far Ruth has come since we started this series just 4 weeks ago. I mean, in chapter 1, she had been recently widowed. She had lost everything and did not know how she could support herself moving forward. She was poor, but she committed in that time to moving to a foreign country and supporting her mother-in-law, who was even in more desperate of straits. And at that point, they did not know how they were going to provide for themselves or what their future held. But now, by the time we get to the end of the story of Ruth, everything has changed for her. I mean, she has given birth to a son, and she is creating a new family with Boaz. She has a home and someone who deeply loves her and is committed to her. Everything has changed for Ruth. And not only for Ruth, everything has changed for Naomi as well. That's what the next verse says. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." This is the same Naomi who changed her name to Mara because she said, "My life has turned out so much more bitterly than I was anticipating." This is the person who said, "I went away full, but God has brought me back empty." But now, at the end of her story, she is full once again. This comes back to what we learned last week, how life is often this cycle of loss and redemption, loss and redemption. Well, we are at the redemption part for this family system. For Ruth and Naomi, their lives have changed, and they're able now to look back and say, and here's how God was showing up all along the way. You usually can't see it in the moment, but when you look back, you go, okay, there was the work of God bringing me to this point of which I now stand. It's one of my favorite stories, I think, in the Bible, the story of Ruth. But I also wonder sometimes, and maybe you've wondered this as well, why is it recorded in our Bible? I mean, it's a great story of redemption, but there are so many stories of redemption. Why is this particular one included in our scriptures? Well, the author of this story answers that question with the last lines of the book of Ruth, because the author ends this entire book with a genealogy. I bet that's not how you expected the book of Ruth to end. But here are the closing verses. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. And the women living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, the David mentioned here is King David, one of the most famous people in the Bible. Yes, this is the David that slayed Goliath. This is the David that God said, he is a man after my own heart. That's the David we have here. So if we trace this genealogy, then Ruth is the great-grandmother of King David, a poor Moabite widow who could have easily had her story just lost to history, becomes permanently intertwined with one of the most famous family lineages in the Bible. That's pretty astounding. But actually, let's take it a step further. The Gospel of Matthew. So now we're jumping to the New Testament. Instead of Ruth ending with a genealogy, the Gospel of Matthew begins with a genealogy. And it's the genealogy of Jesus. So Matthew wants us to know, here is Jesus' family line, and here's how we got to Jesus. So Matthew begins with Abraham. We can show that first slide, Janine, the slide that shows that this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So he's setting out what he's about to tell you. And then he goes on and lists a whole bunch of names. And my guess is you have just skimmed that anytime that you're opening up the Gospel of Matthew. You're going, okay, yep, lots of names, lots of genealogy, how interesting. And actually, what you see on the screen here is just a third of it. So there's two more big sets of, Perez, the father of this person, the father of that person. I want to highlight just one verse for you. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. So this tells us two things. First, Ruth is one of only 4 women that is mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. And second, this means Ruth is directly related to Jesus. Yes, so not only is Ruth the great-grandmother of David, but if you add 27 more greats in front of it, and yes, I counted, that's how closely related Ruth is to Jesus as well. Here's what I want you to realize. When Ruth told Naomi, "Where you go, I will go," she wasn't thinking, I'm making this decision today because one day I'm going to be related to King David. She certainly wasn't thinking, if I do the right thing now, then one day I'll be included in the genealogy of Jesus. No, Ruth never knew how her small act of faithfulness would place her in such an amazing story. But with each decision that was presented to her, she simply did what she believed was faithful in that moment. And it changed history. I mean, much like in our opening illustration, Dick Fosbury practicing this strange new jump on a high school track, Ruth could not see the ripple effects that her decision would create. And yet, what God did was God took those ordinary acts of faithfulness and wove them into this overarching, extraordinary story that has become the story of Ruth. A story that we still cherish in our Bibles today. And you know what? I believe that God does the same thing with us. Yes, you may never see the full impact of your decisions in this lifetime, but every person that you show love to, every faithful act of generosity, every moment that you choose to invest in other people's future, I believe that God uses those seemingly ordinary moments of faithfulness, and then will weave them into this incredible tapestry. So let me give an example. When our vacation Bible school leaders showed up and said, you know what, like in this picture we're going to show for you, I want to invest in these children. And these children may never say thank you, and these children may never really acknowledge all the work that was put into creating this, but you know what? Those teachers are doing it because they trust that God is using that teaching and that the seeds that are planted in the hearts of every child in that room may bloom into a lifetime of faithfulness because they're being introduced to God's love and God's plan for their lives. It's investment into something you can't see, and yet you know in the moment this is the right thing to do. Or I think of our youth leaders who say, you know what, it is worth it. It is worth it to invest in our middle and high school students. And so here's a picture of our Youth Sunday. And they're saying it's worth it to be with these students and to teach them how to lead a worship service and to really tell them why their participation in that matters. But they have no idea how God will use that time. They have no idea if God is capturing one of their hearts and maybe saying, you're going to have a future career in ministry. We have no idea what God is doing because we don't get to see down the line. We don't get to see the impact of our decisions. We're just asked to make that faithful choice, that faithful step, one after the next. And as we live this life of faithfulness, we trust God to then weave that all together into a beautiful tapestry. I loved the children's message today. I loved when you're able to see all that yarn that was all twisted and turned, and sometimes that's how our lives can feel. We go, this is all kind of jumbled. but God can create something beautiful out of it. And God will create something when we offer ourselves in faithfulness to God. So I want you to consider today the time that you spend and the love that you share and the gifts that you give to others. I believe that when these are done for God and when these are done in an act of faith, they can make an extraordinary impact on our world. I find that we often overestimate the importance of the big moments of our lives, but severely underestimate the importance of those little faithful acts that happen on a daily basis. But what Ruth teaches us is that we will rarely know how God's going to use today's faithful decision to really weave tomorrow's story. Amen.
If you would like more information about Unity Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at www.unitypres.org or visit us on Facebook. This is the Unity Presbyterian Church podcast. Have a great week.